Hi, I'm Jesse. I've got a lot of books and I like sharing them with you. Today we're counting down the top DC superhero graphic novels. So I've been a long-time reader of DC ever since I was, I'm going to say 10, maybe 11 years old. 1989, I remember my first comics. They were Batman comics, Detective Comics 629. And I've been reading ever since then, starting with Batman and branching into Superman, definitely The Flash, who's my favorite superhero, reading a lot of DC comics. Eventually, I got into Marvel comics as well, and been reading a lot of different superhero stuff. For this list, even though DC has published a lot over the years, we're not counting Vertigo books or other non-superhero books. So that excludes Sandman, Preacher. I'm excluding Watchmen. That's a sort of a tough call. If I had included it, it would be up near the top. If you haven't read Watchmen, go read it. It's pretty incredible. But we're looking just at superheroes proper here. And so let's count down the list. Coming in at number 15 is Gothic. This is such a cool book. This is an old Batman comic written by Grant Morrison with art by Klaus Janson. Famous creators. And it is scary. It's one of the spookiest, scariest Batman comics that I've read. It has Batman fighting the devil, essentially, although I'm not sure if it states that outright, but it's very spooky and very cool. The artwork is very atmospheric, and it just has this whole environment of dread and doom as Batman tries to stop this terrible catastrophe from happening, but is looking into the distant past as well to find clues to solve a mystery. It's a great book. Okay, so for the next three, I really wanted a couple controversial things in the list because otherwise who's going to write comments on this video? So I've included a couple things that people might argue with and might get up in arms about, as comic fans do sometimes. Starting with Identity Crisis. So Identity Crisis was famously written by Brad Meltzer, who was a novelist. It is a sort of modern take on the Justice League, and it unveils a secret that they had in their past, a sort of scandalous secret. And a lot of people didn't like the book because it sort of tainted the history of the Justice League in that way, but I thought it was really realistically written with great focus on character studies and really examined a whole lot of characters in a way that hadn't been looked at before. And I think it's an excellent book, so check it out. Another potentially controversial book is Strange Adventures. This is a new one. This is very recent, and it's by Tom King. I love Tom King. I've read, I think, all of his work. I think he's an excellent writer. He's willing to take risks and do some daring things, and that makes some of his stories unliked by some. Not all of his stuff is perfect, but I like a lot of it. And this one is about Adam Strange, who's a classic 1950s Buck Rogers style superhero, and it picks him apart in a completely deconstructivist modern way. And again, it reveals the sort of scandalous things in the past that you might not want your superheroes tainted with. Basically the trend that Watchmen started. But it makes for a great story. And he's done this with a number of superheroes and really examined them as characters and broken them down. It also has a great part for Mr. Terrific, who's one of my favorite characters. Yes, that's his name, it's Mr. Terrific. And then the most controversial book on the list, Heroes in Crisis. People are going to hate me for putting this on this list of best graphic novels. This one was super controversial. It's hard to talk about this without spoiling anything, but it took a particular hero and really tainted them, really made them do some bad things. And it's one of my favorite heroes of all time. So why do I like this book at all? I just think it was excellently written. I think it was done as a character study, first and foremost. Some of the plot things don't make any sense. There are some plot holes in it that are really weird. but they also retconned some of it, which means changing the history afterwards, and I think they did a good job with that. But the story in itself, if you just look at it as an examination of these characters who are basically, it's a mental hospital for traumatized superheroes, and examines the trauma that they go through, and it's really incredible to read and heartbreaking as well at the same time. Okay, number 11 is Hush. This is a real classic. A lot of people would probably put this on the list. It's by Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee. Jim Lee being one of the most famous creators of all time and one of the top people at DC Comics. And this was just a really cool Batman story because it goes through Batman's entire rogues gallery, his entire list of friends and sidekicks, family. Every single person in the Batman mythos gets a focus in the book. And it's just like a tour through all these different characters. And so if you want to read a Batman story that highlights 20 different Batman villains, this is a really good one, and the whole thing's a long mystery. The art is beautiful. Jim Lee does a couple flashbacks in watercolor that are really cool. He doesn't usually do that, and it's just really beautiful to look at. And this is the comic in which Batman and Catwoman's relationship really developed and changed in the comics. Number 10 is Starman. This is one of maybe 5 omnibus books of the series. This was a series from the 90s, and one of the things about DC is it's all about legacy, all about superheroes from different ages passing down the mantle to superheroes in later ages, and modern superheroes and kid superheroes, and down the line. And Starman was really about that. The author dug into a lot of obscure DC Comics history and brought back a lot of interesting characters. You don't need to know any of that in order to enjoy the story. And it was about this reluctant superhero guy who inherits the mantle of Starman and is forced to cope with that when he really doesn't want to. This next one is really classics, The Long Halloween. Tim Sale, the artist who's brilliant, passed away recently. The book was used as the basis for the Batman movie, the one that's called The Batman, and also features a tour through different rogues gallery of villains, but with a really stylized noir design. It's a murder mystery, it's dark, and yet Tim Sale has this interesting dark but cartoony style that really fits it. It has a sequel, Dark Victory, that's very, very cool, that introduces Robin, and it had another sequel, Catwoman When in Rome. It was a standalone Catwoman story that tied in the characters as well. All very good. The basis of several of the movies, especially the Batman, just an excellent series of books. Okay, this one's pretty heavy to even lift. This is an omnibus. You don't have to get it as an omnibus. You can get individual graphic novels, but it's Green Lantern. It's the series by Jeff Johns. Hal Jordan died. He was the main Green Lantern. He died. A different, more interesting Green Lantern took over. And then they brought Hal Jordan back. And Jeff Johns ended up taking the story. It was a little bit of a boring direction. This guy's just a fighter pilot, nothing too crazy. But then he expanded the whole mythos to include not just Green Lanterns, but orange lanterns and yellow lanterns and blue lanterns, and this spectrum that was really interesting. And it became this whole intergalactic battle between all these different factions and all these things happening. And it just was a really complex space opera, this huge epic story. And that's the part of it that's really excellent. And for a while, Green Lantern was really the standout book steering a lot of the whole DC universe. And it's just exceptional to take a look at. Look for the individual graphic novels if you can't lift this omnibus. Okay, totally different from space opera is Gotham Central. This is a noir, like down and dirty, feet on the ground book about a police force in Gotham City. And it's really interesting because it barely focuses on Batman at all. I don't even know if he's in it. And it's about the repercussions of what he does. How do you function on a police force when there's vigilantes in your city? What do you do? How do you function on a police force as a regular police officer when there's supervillains? One of the police officers here gets frozen by Mr. Freeze and dies. Like, you just get frozen. It's terrible. and this really examined what it was like to be a cop on the street. It has a real highlight on Renee Montoya, who's one of my favorite characters, who later became the Question. And she's a great character. There's a number of other great characters in it. The artwork is this beautiful, dark, really realistic, gritty looking artwork that is very cool. And the whole book is great. Okay, number 6, All-Star Superman. Look at this cool slipcase. Oh, look, it's like half me. That's pretty creepy. It's got a ribbon and everything, but look, the book is beautiful. Here's Superman and Lois. Here's Superman flying. This was Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely, just a masterpiece story about Superman. He's dying, and it's about what he does to prepare for his death and who he can help along the way, trying to help as many people as he can. It examines the robust use of his powers in really creative ways, and it just focuses on this humble personality that is what's so endearing about Superman and so different from the ridiculous movies that have come out recently. It's just considered a classic. Some people think of it as like the epitome of Superman, and it's a perfect book. It's excellent. Okay, here's another slipcase. This is a book that I think would be on anybody's list. It's Kingdom Come. It's one of the best-selling comics of all time, and this edition is just beautiful. It's about superheroes in the future and sort of that next generation when Superman and the current heroes are old. Here's a copy signed by Mark Waid and Alex Ross. It's fully painted. And at the time, this was really radical, along with the Marvel series that was done. And it's just this story in its heart about how important it is to keep real, noble, old-fashioned values alive in a trend of grittier superheroes. And it's about the old classic heroes being reminded of that lesson. And it's just a completely beautiful book. Number 4, JLA, New World Order. So I was reading a lot of DC in the 90s, so some of these 90s series are really top for me, but I think the first 4 issues of this book were the best JLA, Justice League of America, story ever told. The whole series is great. Grant Morrison, Howard Porter's art is excellent, leading up to like World War III, which was called one of the story arcs. But this first one really established Batman's character as it relates to the Justice League, and established a whole new set of villains, established just a number of new relationships among these classic heroes. It brought the classic heroes back, the classic 7, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and Martian Manhunter, and really just established the Justice League as a force to be reckoned with again. And just really creative, so much fun to read, just a blast. This one is one that I lend out perhaps more than any other book. I've given it as gifts. It's Superman's Secret Identity. It's a little different. Maybe it shouldn't be on this list because it doesn't take place in the DC universe. It takes place in our own universe, in which a young man is named Clark Kent, which is kind of funny because everyone knows that's Superman's secret identity. But then, lo and behold, he develops Superman's powers as he grows up. And what is that like in our world when he's the only person with superpowers? And what are the repercussions of that as it compares to just living in the real world and watching him grow up throughout this series and grow old? It's just really, really cool. It's heartwarming, touching, just a beautiful book. Stuart Immonem's artwork is fantastic, and I really recommend it. Okay, so I mentioned The Flash as my favorite superhero. This is, in my opinion, the best Flash story. It's the return of Barry Allen. So Barry Allen was the Flash. You might know him from the movies and from TV. But in the comics, he died in 1986. And Wally West, who was Kid Flash, became the Flash. And Wally was the Flash for years before they brought Barry back. Or did they bring him back? In this story, Barry comes back, but all is not as it seems. You sort of tag along with Wally, and you watch as Wally's heart is broken. The main arc of Wally's story was him getting over the grief of losing his uncle and mentor, the Flash, and really dealing with that in a terribly insecure and immature way until he finally grows up and becomes a hero. And this book is where that sort of all culminates after 79 issues of watching him grow from an immature young man into a hero and overcome his demons and come into his own as the real Flash. And it's just incredible to read. And this one is signed by Greg LaRocque, who's one of my favorite artists, definitely my favorite Flash artist. And the book is just fabulous. And it's hard to top that one, but this is such a classic that I need to. This is Batman Year One. Now, with Batman Year One, you might be thinking, wait a minute, where's Dark Knight Returns on this list? Well, Frank Miller established this voice of Batman as so unique in Batman Year One, and I love it. And he established a slightly different voice in Dark Knight Returns, which makes sense because Batman's much older there. And I just happen to not really like that voice very much. I like the younger Batman. So Dark Knight Returns isn't one of my favorites, although it's a brilliant book. But Batman Year One is the one that I think is one of the best stories ever written. I give this to friends. I recommend it to friends. You don't have to know anything about anyone in the DC universe to enjoy this story. It's such a great story. They've based so many of the TV show and movies and everything about Batman on this book. It set the stage and set the tone for Batman for decades. And it's just such an excellent book. Probably one I've reread more than any others. And it's highly recommended, as are all the books on this list. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and have a good one.